What's good with it, homies? Slingblade98 here, you guys. This is going to be a music countdown video, my opinion on the top 10 bands from the 80s and the 1990s collectively. If you go platinum, it's got nothing to do with luck. It just means that a million people are stupid as fuck. Immortal Technique once said that in the lyrics of a song. Great rapper, and that's very poetic, I think. Anyways, I also feel like it applies to pop music, which is why I left a lot of musicians like Madonna and Michael Jackson off of here, because frankly, their catalogs are so shallow that if you were to dive in head first, you'd hit your head on the bottom like a swimming pool. So I put on some other people who you could just swan dive into from the Empire State Building, and you wouldn't hit your head on the bottom at all. So that was a little bit corny, but let's get right into it. Uno momento, por favor. Let me find my list. Okay, here we are. Number 10, Pearl Jam. This is a band who I also like for their activism in addition to their music. I'll give you a couple of examples of each. For instance, their activism, they had a very publicized feud with Ticketmaster where they refused to play in Ticketmaster stadiums because they were overcharging their fans, and they felt as though it was not right that their fans should have their wallet raped in order to go to a fucking concert. So they boycotted them, and Ticketmaster has like a monopoly on every big stadium on earth, it seems like. So it really hurt their ability to tour in support of their big albums, but they chose their ethics over their fame. That's pretty damn respectable and pretty damn unusual. Some of their best songs are Black, Jeremy, and Even Flow. Check out the songs, or not the songs, I'm sorry, the albums 10 and Versus are very good albums. So Pearl Jam is one of those bands where they haven't been destroyed by heroin, much like, Nirvana or Sublime, two bands that you'll see later on this list. Eddie Vedder is one of the only grunge icons we actually have left who hasn't been destroyed by drugs. I think he had a bout with alcoholism, but he's come out on top, and he's actually still producing stuff solo. Like a couple of years ago, he did the soundtrack for Into the Wild, which was a really awesome movie. Coming in at number 9 on my list is Bush. This band is probably most famous to mainstream music fans for the song Glycerine or for the album 16 Stone. They also have another really good one in Razorblade Suitcase. Bush, a little bit at times, sounds too much like a British version of Nirvana, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. They have a lot of their own good songs that follow a much more complicated chord progression and aren't just power chords being beaten. Okay, so they also have some unique instruments like violin and some of their radio hits, which is kind of cool for a grunge band because usually the musical ability is kind of limited because they're focusing more on the energy, and that's kind of the signature of punk music. It's more about the attitude than how it actually sounds. But Bush is actually one of the more eloquent punk bands, and I really like their lead singer's voice. Some of their best songs include Everything Zen, The Little Things, I Don't Want to Come Down Off of This Cloud. I think I already mentioned Glycerine to you guys. Okay, so let's get on to the next band because we have time constraints here. Coming in at number 8 is the band Sublime. This is a ska punk band, which is not usually my style, but I just had to make an exception. This guy is hilarious and at the same time very tragic because he's another one, very much like Kurt Cobain, who was taken from us because of his drug use. And they have hilarious songs such as Date Rape or The Wrong Way. They talked about stuff that wasn't necessarily politically correct. They also had excellent music like Santeria, which was on a very much more serious note, and songs that are inspirational such as Love Is What I Got. I really wish that that guy hadn't died because they were one of the best bands of the era, and if they had more stuff, more than one or two albums, I would definitely have to put them much higher. And some of these other bands would have to be on the lookout. Number 7 and number 6 for that matter, but I'll get to them in a second. Hold your fucking horses! No, I'm just playing. Number 7 is Pink Floyd, originally from 1969, and they were still producing stuff, mostly good live albums in this era, but post Roger Waters' Pink Floyd was still very listenable. The Pulse album, Delicate Sound of Thunder, I think I'm missing one. The Division Bell. They had a lot of really good albums during that time period that really expanded their catalog, and they didn't just milk their fame, which is respectable. There's a lot of bands that do that. So Pink Floyd, my favorite album from them, which I actually own personally, is the Pulse album. It stands up, in my opinion, to a lot of the original performances because it's a live album of songs from like Dark Side of the Moon and stuff. And while some of their 80s stuff isn't quite as good as The Wall or Amagama or Animals, it's still very good, and it stands up to Def Leppard or Bon Jovi or Bruce Springsteen or those other fags who were going at the time and kicks them right in the nuts with a steel-toed boot. Okay, so Pink Floyd deserves a spot, even though they're really a 60s band. They're one of the best bands of the 80s and 90s too. It's just pretty much shows you how good they really are, that they were that good for that long, and they still are. Coming in at number 6 on my list is ACDC. I mean, after Bon Scott died, I feel like their newer lead singer did a really good job filling in and keeping with the tone. Songs like Back in Black, and they actually have done the majority of their career with this new lead singer. I believe his name is Brian Johnson. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, but really, I mean, Angus Young, Malcolm, and their drummer, who I don't remember his name, have produced some of the best hard rock of all time, and AC/DC will forever be one of my favorite bands, and they definitely deserve a spot on this list. So coming in at number 5, I got to do the rest of these bands really fast, is the band Metallica, the best heavy metal band of all time by every means. And they pretty much came around in the 80s, so it's especially important to my list because they're actually from the era. Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, the Black Album. I don't like some of their more recent stuff, such as Death Magnetic, but I feel as though they are definitely one of the most recognizable and deserving of their fame. Coming in at number 4 is Tupac Shakur. And the reason I like this guy is much like Immortal Technique, he talked about social awareness issues such as teen pregnancy, racial inequality, the plight of the single mother, gang life, and he really gave us an inside view of the streets, whereas somebody like Immortal Technique, who's college educated, is a little bit more of an outsider looking down on the streets, like almost from a skyscraper view. This guy is nitty gritty, and he's very poetic too, but it's in a much more raw form. Check out the song "Keep Your Head Up." And I feel like white people get a bad image of Tupac because, they think he's just this violent thug like a lot of other rappers. But this guy was really enlightened, in my opinion, and it's a shame he got caught up in a lot of bullshit and ended up being murdered. Because Tupac, I feel like, would have been one of the few musicians of the era who continued and wouldn't just become, as Doug Stanhope once said, doing Super Bowl halftime shows with Elton John or something just indescribably selloutish like that. Okay, so Tupac definitely deserves this spot. Coming in at number 3 is the band Nirvana. Pretty much they made it so all of the bands that came before them, such as the Pixies and Pearl Jam and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, could get some recognition, and they brought alternative music to the mainstream and made it viable enough. And even though they weren't the first, they made it so, other bands who'd come before them and made their style possible could get their own fame and recognition. And that's really cool, and that's something I feel like people don't always give them their props on. Additionally, they've got a very deep catalog, and usually with bands this famous, I find that they tend to be overrated, but Nirvana has a pretty much a plethora of albums where you can just listen to any track and it's as good as the stuff you hear on the radio. I mean, getting beyond the obvious songs such as Come As You Are or Smells Like Teen Spirit, this band produced songs like Heart Shaped Box and The Man Who Sold the World and All Apologies that don't get quite as much radio play. Oh, and also Lithium, but are just as good as their famous songs. Coming in at number 2 is a very underground 80s band, The Replacements. The last two artists are 80s bands, by the way, so if you feel like, oh, this guy's just marking out for grunge music, I'm not. The last two bands are not grunge music at all. Number 2 is The Replacements, and I'm not going to give you guys a starting place on this because I have, limitations on time, and my computer battery's about to die. But check out the album Tim. It came in really high on the Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums of all time list, and it was really one of the few things they got right on that list. There's a lot of crap on there, but this is really one of the best bands of pretty much, in my opinion, the 20th century. I mean, they have songs such as You Ain't Nothing But a Waitress in the Sky, 16 and Blue, Bastards of Young is probably their best song. Okay, so I'm going to get to number 1 now, okay? You guys have been with me this whole time. You've been with me through these screw-ups and some of the botches, but you've stayed strong, and so I'm going to reward you with number 1, who is undoubtedly Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I'm so happy for this guy that he managed to get clean and sober before he was tragically killed in a plane crash. I mean, he had a big problem with cocaine and alcoholism, but at the same time, he was able to live out the last period of his life with some clarity of mind, and I think that's really cool that he finally kicked that before he was taken from us. This guy covered Jimi Hendrix songs and improved upon perfection, additionally songs by Elmore James and Robert Johnson and Clapton, and really he was the world's biggest blues fan. I mean, he did stuff with B.B. King, and this guy is the last, in my opinion, real guitar virtuoso who played with feeling in addition to technicality. So I think Stevie Ray Vaughan is the best artist of that period, period and arguably the best guitarist of all time because he brought the technical proficiency that Page and Hendrix lacked, but kept the feeling. You know, I'm not saying they're not technical, but they were kind of sloppy at points. This guy was, I don't know, like a surgeon, but at the same time, he had the same feeling that you saw in, you know, the Voodoo Child from Woodstock '69, where Hendrix looks like he's stubbing his toe in slow motion. You know, so this guy really deserves to be the best artist of the '80s, '90s, and that's why I put him here. Rate, comment, subscribe. Slingblade 98 out. I hope you guys really liked this video. I worked hard on it.